I did not quit, but other people did. This was a gay nightclub in Scotland, set in a really fancy building from the early 1800s. It was originally the office building for a bank. Think big chandeliers, fancy wooden floors, and wall tiles, old-fashioned furniture. The club used the ground floor and basement of the building. There were 6 empty floors above that were unused and abandoned. The long-term staff had a challenge. You had to go one of the stairwells at night, all the way to the top floor on your own. They would check if you had done it by asking what was unusual about the top floor. The answer was the stairs were made of stone all the way up, except the last floor, which was made of wood. One of the bouncers, a big scary man covered in tattoos, the type of guy you wouldn't argue with, went running out the building in tears one night. He had gone up the stairs on his own. Halfway up, something growled in his ear. He quit on the spot and never came back. I never had anything like that happen to me, but I did see and hear things a lot. Everybody did. I was a DJ, so I was often in the basement on my own, setting up equipment. One of the managers was in the office on her own. She was looking around, and there was a face peering around the door at her. It was right up in the top corner, about 7 feet up in the air. She didn't quit, but she just told it to get the hell out of there. I once went up and explored the abandoned floors during the day. They had little offices and hotel rooms on the upper floors. I had a horrible feeling that something wasn't right, and it got worse the higher up the building I went. On the 5th floor, I could hear running water. As I got closer to it, it sounded like a shower running. It sounded like someone was in the shower, because the sound of the water wasn't uniform and the splashing was uneven. You can definitely hear the difference between an empty running shower and someone moving around under the water. I turned around and came back down at that point. I never went up again. I worked in a food store that's in a strip of stores. Few years ago, it was a huge field with a shack on it. Built it up super quick, 2 years from empty field to opening. Used to be a ranch. I know at least a ranch hand died on the property. If the store was quiet early in the morning or at night, especially before or after hours, when there's barely any employees, you will hear the bulk bin lids and the freezer doors open up and shut on their own. In the bathroom, the lights would go off and pop back on, but longer than what you would consider a flicker. Constantly looking like you would see someone out of the corner of your eye. You would hear the phone ring, but it wasn't, or someone say your name and no one's there. The worst was when I opened the walk-in freezer and saw a man in a hat standing behind the pallet. I blinked and he was gone. There was a kid lingering too, I always thought, just based on feelings. Your shirt would get little tugs or would randomly ride up. One of our customers was more sensitive than I am, and one day he asked me if I knew any little boys who passed while clearly looking beside me. No, he's not mine. I don't know why, but he's just here. This man goes, "Oh, he likes you." I worked in a library that was founded in the late 1800s. I worked IT in the basement in an office that you could only reach if you had a key card. You had to go through 2 key card locked doors to even get to my desk. I would work late once a week until about 6, and in the winter it would get dark so early. I hated being in the office down there alone, even though I was perfectly safe because nobody could reach me. One evening I was at my desk and I heard whistling in the hallway. I could hear large heavy footsteps like someone was wearing heavy work boots. My stomach lurched because the only way out of the basement was through that hallway. I heard the footsteps in and whistling in. I never heard anyone come through the 2 access doors, so I couldn't rationalize it. I called the main desk and told them what I heard, and they invited me to come up to spend the rest of my shift in their company. There was nowhere to hide in that hallway. I made a quick exit that night. I had another job years later working in a factory. It wasn't old or anything historical. Without specifying too much, it was a food production plant. Given the nature of the factory, you had to wear protective eyewear, a hairnet, and you were encouraged to wear gloves. I really hated the place. The work was so miserable and mind numbing. I often fantasized about ending my life on the clock. Right when I was in the middle of having these thoughts, an old man came up to me abruptly and asked me how I liked working there. I noticed he wasn't wearing any of the required PPE, so I figured he might be manager or an owner. I lied and said I liked it. I had a whole conversation with this guy for a few minutes. I turned my head to look at a coworker and looked back and he was gone. When I asked my manager who the old guy was, she told me to shut the hell up and stop freaking her out. She asked me, "Who told you to mess with me?" Apparently, this guy had worked at the plant. He worked there until he died. He was eligible to retire for years but never did. It makes me sad to think even after dying, he's still hanging around that factory. I didn't leave my job because I'm used to the paranormal, but here is my story. One night I was working late. At that time, the only people that were left in the building were the security guards and me. So around 12 a.m., while doing my work on my laptop, a movement caught my attention. An old lady working from one office room to the toilet area. I thought nothing of it. Then a few minutes later, she walked from the toilet to another office room. Still didn't bother me. After I'm done, I head downstairs to the lobby to sign out. The security was there as well, getting ready to patrol the building. I assumed the old lady was a cleaner, so I asked the security about her working these late. The security looked at me and said I was the only one left in the building. And after that, two security people went up to check the whole floor, came down and said there wasn't anyone. The next day, the security whom I asked showed me a video alone in my workspace working that late night, but the CCTV camera also caught the office and toilet door open on its own. I currently run a bar that is haunted. The physical building is 25 years old, but we are a regulars bar. I've been there nearly 15 years and over time we have had several regulars die. Not in the bar though. I have witnessed several bizarre things. When I first started there, I went to mop one of the bathrooms. It's a one haller, try the door, it's locked. So I was sitting in a table at the end of the hall for the bathrooms. I watched the door partially open and then close. I am curious, so I go and knock on the door. No answer. I try the handle, it's unlocked, so I pull open the door and no one is in the bathroom. There are no windows and there is no way for someone to have gotten past me. Every Sunday night I do payroll after closing and something always happens. See something on the bar move on the security cameras, a refrigerator door opening, something being dragged across the floor like a chair or table. I'm always alone and it gets a little freaky sometimes, but I'm kind of used to it. I worked for a call center at a business in town that had many national names on its clients list. We mostly worked second shift while the business portion worked first shift. The call center was most busy during second shift. We tried to catch people watching TV or having dinner. The business occupied two buildings, one 3 stories and one 4 story stall, that had been renovated into one, with a covered atrium in the middle. The buildings had a lot of charm. One elevator had the decorative cage you had to close by hand and buttons for the floors, but on the call center side, there was a much smaller elevator. This elevator had a normal door on each floor with a doorknob. Yes, there was a safety mechanism to prevent people from opening it if the elevator wasn't on that floor. Every door for that elevator had one of those hydraulic things attached to the top so it would open and close slowly. The elevator was small too, like standing in a small closet with a few people, and the control was a rocker arm. Pull the arm away and the elevator goes up. Push it another way and the elevator goes down. It was common for new hires to stop the elevator between floors until they mastered the touch of it. Rumors said that these two buildings were a seedy hotel and a brothel back in the day. There were even stories of murders, but I don't think I ever saw anything to confirm this. In all fairness, I never went to the library to investigate. Anyway, there would be occasional reports of apparitions and such, but I never saw anything. One person I was close to swore up and down, and still to this day, that she saw a woman with no face in the big elevator going up. She was wearing a white dress. Stories like this would occasionally be told, especially of the white dress wearing woman. Everybody also always got a creepy feeling in the basement passageway to the break room. Business was so good that we outgrew our space and were planning on moving 2 blocks south to a high rise building. There was a lot of excitement in the air about this move. I think whatever was hanging out in the building also knew because the intensity and frequency of the experiences grew. Sightings went up, but also reports of people feeling like they were being watched. Doors were slammed with nobody around. We always had a receptionist on the ground floor because this was the early 90s, and of course we did. I worked with her, I'll call her Editha, for a few years as a phone operator in the call center. She worked second shift like us in the call center. Remember that little elevator with the sway controller and the hydraulic arm at the top of the door to prevent it from being opened or closed too quickly? The ground floor door for that elevator slammed shut. We all could hear it, even on the second and third floors. I ran down the steps and Aretha was beside herself. She was white as a ghost. She said it just slammed by itself. We tried several times to slam that door, but the hydraulic system always prevented it.